Hi there, and welcome to Draw With Me. Today is going to be an interesting exercise in creativity that I hope that you will join me in. It is nice to have lots of folks here with me and to know that you are interested in drawing as well. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today, and I'm hoping that you're seeing me and hearing me and that all is going well. Yes, I see that you're discussing watercoloring and colored pencils and so forth, but if one person could give me a thumbs up that you can actually see me, then I can proceed with confidence. Yes, excellent, good. Jesus, thank you. So, today is the day after my birthday. And, my birthday is a bittersweet event. Sometimes it is interesting background noise. Yes, somebody's vacuuming outside here. It'll stop soon. But hopefully, other than that, you'll be able to hear me well. Yeah, so, as I said, today is the day after my birthday. And, I've always been excited by my birthday. People get excited by their birthdays. But, it also is a time of, for me at least, of reflection, thinking about my life, thinking about how much of it is past, thinking about how much of it is left, thinking about whether I'm doing the right thing with my days. And so, in that kind of contemplative, ruminative mood that I'm in, I thought it would be interesting to talk about an aspect of drawing that has always been very important to me, but which I haven't really talked about that much on Draw With Me, which is the meditative aspect of drawing. So, in other words, not focusing on the end result, which is to have a finished drawing, and not focusing on the technique necessarily of drawing, how to draw better, how to get certain effects, but instead to focus on the fact that drawing, it's a gerund, right? It's about an activity. It's not about drawn. It's not about draw. It's about drawing, the process of drawing. And that I find for me, drawing is an opportunity to be in the moment, to be here now, and to let other concerns ebb away, at least for this time. And instead to say, I'm going to be here now, I'm going to be in the present, and I'm going to think about the thing that I'm drawing. I'm going to think about the feelings that I'm having in this moment. Or maybe I'm not even going to think about anything. Maybe I'm just going to allow my mind to quiet, to calm down, and instead to say, let's just be here together in this moment. And so there are a number of different kinds of drawing exercises that are really helpful in getting to this sort of state. Is it a Zen state? Is it a flow state? Is it there something happening with one's alpha waves and serotonin and the various other bits of brain science that I'm only pretending to know anything about? But there's no question to me that spending some time doing some drawing and just not thinking about the end result is very calming and soothing and cleansing out the monkey voices and all this other stuff, and just allowing me to be present. So that's what I want to try and do today, in the spirit of post-birthday being. And I hope you'll join me in this meditative state, as Thistle has pointed out it's called. So let's try meditating together. Now, the kinds of exercises that are good for this are ones in which you are drawing something that you're not really focusing on the names of the things you're drawing. So for instance, if I was to draw a face and I was thinking an awful lot about eyes, the nose, the likeness, all that kind of stuff, it wouldn't allow me to get into that state. But if I can draw something where it doesn't really matter what the thing is, what matters is the feeling of pen on paper. So what I want you to do is to make sure you have a sketchbook and some pen and a pen with you, and we're going to draw something that is sort of abstract. Now, one exercise that I've done, and you could do this if you prefer, is to look at your hand, look at the palm of your hand, and to look at these lines, and to just get as close as you can to lines within lines. What we want to do is put on our sort of magnifying glasses onto our brains and get in as deep as possible. So that's one way one can do this exercise. That's not what I'm going to be doing today myself, but you could. Another is to take something like a piece of wood. Like if you have kind of a rough chopping block or a counter or even a wooden floor, and to start to look very carefully at the grain of the wood and to draw that. There are lots of things like that that are sort of natural things that are abstracted and that allow you to get into that. But what I'm going to be doing is focusing on the almighty dollar. I'm going to be drawing a dollar bill. Now, a dollar bill is an incredibly complex piece of visual art. It is a line engraving that is made, of course, as complex as possible, so it's difficult to forge. And I've done this a few times, and it's always been really interesting. And I started to do a drawing of this particular dollar bill, F22680641M. You probably don't have this one. You probably have another, and you may not have a dollar bill. You may have a euro. You may have whatever the denomination of the currency of your country is. But get out a bill. Just get out a bill from your wallet, and let's look at it carefully, and let's examine this line, this art. And I'm sure that your currency, whatever it is, has the same kind of complexity to it. And this is going to be challenging on your eyesight, honestly. Trying to get as much and as deeply into focus as you can be a really interesting experience. So I'm going to be drawing on my iPad. I'm not going to be using any snazzy iPad tricks. That's not at all the point of this. I'm using the iPad simply because it's just the easiest thing to share with you rather than setting up an overhead camera. And so I want to just kind of show that and work on that with you. So you absolutely do not need an iPad. There's no need for that at all. Instead, what I would say is just get out a piece of currency and let's do this thing. So let me just see. I'm just waiting for my iPad to perk up here, and then I will share it with you. So let me just share my screen with you, and here we go. There it is. In fact, let me make it bigger, and let me make me smaller so that you can see all this detail. So this is something that I started last night when I was first thinking about this idea, and I thought, let's just do something really simple like this. Let me just turn it sideways so you can really see the whole thing. So I just started working on this, but the point of this is to get in as deep as possible. Okay? So somebody says they have to use a debit card. Interesting. Okay. If you don't have cash, then what I would say is, again, you could, honestly, why do there always have to be some people in the crowd who can't just go along with the rules? What are you guys, artists? For crying out loud. So anyway, you could. I think you could take any kind of organic thing if you wanted to, as long as it's really super complex and somewhat abstracted. Okay, so let's start there. You can do that, but I'm going to work on a doggone dollar bill, people. It doesn't matter what drawing app I'm using on my iPad, all right, people? I'm not talking about the iPad today. I'd rather not, if you don't mind. I really would like to get into this meditative state rather than thinking about the technology, but I'm using Procreate just not to be snarky and mean. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to focus on my dollar bill, and I'm hoping that you're doing the same. And what I'm trying to do is be as careful as I can to get as much detail in as I can. In fact, let me try. I have a grid on this for some reason. All right. So the idea here is to go deep and to see as far into this dollar bill as I can. And I hope that you're doing the same thing. And I think if you have a pretty narrow pen, that would probably be smart, so that you can really get as detailed as you can. See, I'm really trying to use the smallest pen that I can on the iPad. And but if you have a micron marker, or I would say even a uniball could be small enough. Just get something really super small. Okay? And don't do sketches. I drew a couple landmarks for myself yesterday because I was feeling insecure, but don't do that. Try and just stay in this second, this moment of where you are right now. That's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to do exactly one part of it. And also, I would say, just looking into the future, don't feel like you have to do this whole thing now. In fact, this drawing that I'm working on is one that I plan to continue working on probably through the weekend, if I have some downtime, because it's really not about finishing. It's about going deep and trying to be in this moment as much as you can. I'm going to put on my sort of Michael Nobbs voice now and speak to you in a gentle and dulcet tone so that you feel soothed and relaxed as we delve deeper and deeper. This is my Bob Ross moment to say, come my friends, let us be together in this moment of harmony. Let us suspend all judgment. I don't sound like Bob Ross now. I sound like some kind of a minister. But let's focus here on the little squiggles that make up the watermarks of the dollar bill. I'll tell you a story while we do this. It's a story of an artist who I think is kind of an interesting artist. His name he's now passed away, but his name was J.S.G. Boggs. JSG. The J, I think, stood for James, but he referred to himself as JSG, standing for Just Some Guy Boggs. He was an American artist who died about 3 or 4 years ago at a relatively young age. I mean, I think he was in his early 60s, maybe. And when J.S. Boggs was a young artist, he was in Texas, I think it was, and Diane, we are doing meditative drawing, so feel free to join us in that. So he was in a diner, and he was having coffee, and he was sitting by himself, so he started to to kind of doodle. And as he doodled, he started to draw a dollar bill. And he spent some time on it, and when he was done eating, the waitress came over to him and said, saw what he had been doing, and said, "Wow, that's so great. I love that. Can I buy it from you?" And he said, "No, I'll tell you what. Let me pay for my cup of coffee with this drawing. And you accept this as a dollar bill." And that cup of coffee cost less than $1. So he asked her to give him a receipt and change back for the dollar. And this became like a breakthrough event in his creative life. This idea of drawing money and then using it as currency. And he started doing this more and more, and he did really intricate drawings of dollar bills. Not just dollar bills, but 20s, 100s, and so forth. But what he would do in every case is he would spend that piece of art, not as a forgery. He would explain to whoever it was that he was spending it with that this was what he was doing, that he was an artist, and that he wanted them to come to an agreement that this piece of art that he had made was going to be worth the price of the thing that he was buying. And so he a lot of collectors started getting interested in what he was doing, and they would buy the art in a very interesting way. So they would buy the receipt from Boggs, the receipt and the change. That's what they would buy from him. And then he would tell them who had received the piece of art as currency, and they would go to that person and they would buy the art back. And of course, it would be worth significantly more money than the person had paid, had exchanged with Boggs. So, for instance, that waitress who exchanged the piece of art for a cup of coffee, then a collector would come in and pay as much as you would for a piece of art. In fact, some of Boggs's artwork went for hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think his record at auction was something like $480,000. So that began this interesting process of making the art, making the transaction, and he wouldn't always necessarily do it in the place. So it wasn't necessarily that he was, it wasn't necessarily that he was sitting in, a grocery store drawing. That wasn't the case. He would sometimes spend a lot of time making a really beautiful piece of art about $1. And sometimes he would copy the art exactly, the art of the dollar. He would copy it exactly. But sometimes he wouldn't. Sometimes he would copy it, and he would change things. Like he would replace George Washington with his own face. And in fact, he became friends with somebody who worked at the U.S. Mint, and they made a piece of art, like they would use on currency. They made a piece of art of his face, a portrait of him, done in the steel engraving style of a dollar bill. And then he used that and copied that and made a dollar bill with himself. He would change the wording. He would also screw around and instead of having, like the dollar bill normally has one particular building on it, he would replace it. So like the $20 bill, I think, has the U.S. Treasury on it, and he replaced it with the Supreme Court. So it wasn't necessarily an exact copy, although it could be. The point wasn't what the art was about. the real point of his art, I think, was to talk about what is money, and isn't money really just an agreement that we make between ourselves, between each other, to say this thing is going to have value, and we're going to use this as a surrogate for our labor or whatever it is. So, if you work to make money, and then that money is given to somebody else, well, that is basically, the money is just a kind of a stand-in for your labor. So for an artist who's making art, that's obviously his labor is going into making that art, and then he's selling that labor, to the collector. And it really just makes you think, as you're looking at this, often a very beautifully crafted piece of drawing, that what you're really thinking about also is money and its relationship with art, money, its relationship with labor. What is the true value of money? What do we really talk about when we're talking about money? And there's so many other things that just make it into a rich and complicated discussion that goes far beyond just, here's a drawing of $1. And I think that I personally find that really interesting. It sounds intellectual, but I think it isn't really. I think it's visceral. We have a visceral reaction to money. And here's another interesting thing that happened with Boggs, is the Treasury Department got on his case. And the Treasury Department started to question, is this forgery? Is he forging money? Now, his drawings always were one-sided. He never drew the back of it, so you could never mistake it for $1. And in fact, but he was arrested and got into all kinds of situations with people. So Obo Girl asked me if I'm talking because I'm live casting, but if I was doing this as meditation excerpts, what thoughts would I have about while I'm drawing? Well, Boggs is certainly something I would think about, but I could be thinking about this $1. I could be thinking about how these lines come together. That would certainly be something I was thinking about. But in an ideal sort of form of meditation, I really wouldn't be thinking about anything at all. I would just be in the moment drawing, which would probably make for a fairly dull YouTube live draw with me. And if you want to, I can just shut up, or you can turn off the volume. But failing that, I'll just keep talking about Boggs, if you want. So I see there's some complaining about there's some issue with not being able to see my drawing. I see, because you don't see my hand, you just see the drawing itself popping up, and it's kind of uninteresting. I understand that. Well, why don't I come closer, and then you can see it in a bit more detail. So yeah, interesting. I learned something new with each one of these draw with me's as to what is successful and what isn't. So please do feel free to critique this and to tell me what you think is effective and what isn't. Maybe it's time to stop doing this with the iPad. Is that what you're telling me to? The iPad itself is a bit of an inhibition. But do feel free to not look at what I'm doing at all, and instead look at what your own contemplative drawing has for you. The thing I find about the $1 is there's just so many details. There's so many things you can take for granted, like I could take for granted how this one looks, and then I see, no, in fact it has a shadow, and that shadow has a shadow below. So I'm concentrating on drawing the actual the number, but actually there's much more interesting stuff going on in the shadows. And then, it's almost hopeless to try and capture the kind of spidery, lacy part of the engraving patterns. It's as you can see, I'm kind of rushing through this a bit, but in an ideal exercise, I would just focus exactly on what these lines look like. Yeah, okay. I'm also trying to come up with some kind of style of line making that isn't necessarily a reproduction of what I'm seeing, but is like my own version of this stuff. It's very doodly, this whole experience. Creating patterns within patterns. It's one of the nice things about doodling, but I'm trying to capture at least the spirit of what a dollar bill feels like. This could become more boring if I was to draw the lines on my hand, which is a really deeply immersive experience. If you've never done it, I really recommend that you do. But it's also probably incredibly tedious to watch somebody else do. Okay, well, I think I'm going to carry on doing this on my own, because it does feel like a very much of it's a really cool experience, but it's probably not the most interesting thing to watch. And it's also certainly, my experience of it is compromised a little bit by knowing that I'm doing it live. So let me leave it kind of at that. Come back to just talking to you, if that's okay. So Catherine, actually, all right, I will continue. I did get insecure there for a minute about doing this, but I will try to continue doing it instead. Let's see. What I was going to say is, do you think about the original design? I think that's what Catherine is suggesting, is that thinking about what was the process by which somebody designed this. I mean, this was designed by an artist, I guess an artist. I don't know if somebody working for the Treasury Department necessarily consider themselves an artist, but I think that we could. And they not only designed it, but also, of course, had to draw it. And the thing about the dollar bill and about all money designs is they change periodically, and they change in small ways. They'll change things about it. I mean, maybe you've noticed with the $20 bill over the last decade or so, it has changed so drastically a number of times as they add new things. And I think at one point they redid the drawing of Andrew Jackson completely, and that gave it like a much more sort of modern, more big and bold feeling. They made the image also larger. It's amazing that some artists had to consider all these things. I can imagine the meetings that they had to go through to think about all that stuff. Yeah. This also reminds me a little bit of Etch-a-Sketch. Remember that? Did you ever have one of those? Not Etch-a-Sketch, Spirograph. I was really interested in Spirograph as a kid. It had all these little cogs that you would put in a big circle. You had a big circle frame, and then you would put a cog in it, and you would put your pen into one of the holes on the cog, and each hole would create a different set of patterns as you revolved that wheel around and around, and it had a lot of mysterious things about it. For instance, it had I think there were like the different names of different countries on different cogs, as if they'd been invented and developed in different places. I don't know. It was a mysterious thing. Does anybody else remember that? Janice asked me if I'm going to go back and add gray shading. Well, there is no gray shading as far as I can tell in the dollar bill. It's just black ink. It is completely black ink. It looks gray, perhaps because, but if you zoom out like that, it has a gray feeling, but it's not gray. It is black, all black. A lot of what's interesting about this exercise also is that you have to do a lot of careful attention to where things intersect each other and line up with each other. So for instance, whoops, that line is not right. So for instance, this line that I'm drawing now, where does it intersect that circle? It's sort of just below the base of the 1. So I've already put it a little high. So right away I already see that I'm making a bit of an error. And sometimes these errors, when you make them, then you measure something else off that line that you drew, and then that causes yet another error, and then it can domino on you, so that you end up getting more and more wonky as you go. So I think it's not only an interesting meditation exercise, but it's also a reinforcement of a lot of the things that we think about when we're drawing anything, which is, what is the relationship between things, where do they intersect, how big are they compared to other things, all those sorts of matters. And also looking deep. How deep can you look, and how much can you see within details? And also, can you overcome preconceptions? Like, for instance, now I'm just making these little loop-de-loops, but if I look even closer, they're actually not the same, and that each other loop has a different quality to it, and so I need to reflect that. I don't know. You could go quite mad doing this stuff, and that is kind of one of the pleasures of it too, is the sort of doodliness of the whole thing. So it's interesting what Corinne says, that it looks formal and exact when you zoom out. It does look kind of like a dollar bill, sort of. I think this lettering gives away that it's not, because this lettering isn't quite exact. But when you zoom in, you see all the weirdness of it. Right? There's a lot of extremely inexact things going on in here. I guess I could work on it at a really high level of magnification and get it that much more exact. I don't know. For those of you who are wondering whether this is forgery, I actually have looked on the U.S. Treasury's website to see whether or not drawing a dollar bill is considered forgery. What do you think? Obviously, the way that I draw it is going to make it seem less like forgery than perhaps a more exacting artist. But here's what the U.S. Treasury has to say about it. You are, in fact, allowed to make reproductions of U.S. currency under certain conditions. And those conditions are that you have to only do it on one side. You can't do a piece of art that has both sides. And that you should make it either 75% or less of the original dimensions, or 150% or more of the original dimensions. So a dollar bill, I think, is 3 inches by 9 inches. So if you made it 2 inches by whatever it is, 6 inches, you'd be fine. And if you made it, 9 9 inches by 15 inches. I don't know. Straining my math brain right now. But yeah, so as long as you aren't creating something that looks just like a dollar and is two-sided, you're fine. I could go and try and, I guess, spend this JPEG somewhere. I think I probably wouldn't get away with it, but that's okay. You know, this is a lot of work for $1. And the nice thing about JPEG is I could make hundreds of copies of it, so I could make hundreds of dollars really quickly. Up to me. But and I hope that when you're doing this, you're really trying to avoid, like what I was just doing, like I drew these lines that went all the way across here, like that. And then I realized when I looked at the dollar bill, the dot lines don't go all the way across. They hit a certain point, and at that point they turn into this sort of doodly thing like that. So, you know, if I break my meditative state and stop observing, I will make mistakes that I will then pay for. Another thing that's interesting also is to find landmarks that I've created. So having this set of numbers here has been really helpful to me because I can use them as landmarks. So I can say to myself, okay, this squiggly thing that's going to happen here happens between the 4 and the 1. And you know, this little pointy thing that's down here happens between the 2 2s. That's the way it is on my bill. And then there's a 6 right here, because there is in fact 4 6s on this dollar bill. There's one you can see right above this, and there's this one here that I'm drawing here. The 6 is apparently, if you're really interested in the dollar bill. But you see how different this top one is than the bottom one? So I'm not happy with that. I shouldn't be doing this, but I am erasing it. And I'm going to try and do it more carefully. Be a bit more observant about it. Sorry, I did cheat just then. It's true. Cheated. Cheating, forging, what else? Here it is. I had a birthday and I became a criminal. You know, this is the way it goes. This is how life changes. So anyway. All right. It's interesting that drawing less than the half is legal. I'm not sure what you mean. If you make it, is it? Yeah, it needs to be a quarter. It needs to be 75% or less, or 150% or more of the original thing. So yeah, that's the trade-off. And I think it's interesting to have a drawing like this in your sketchbook, or in my case on your iPad, to come back to whenever you're feeling the need for a bit of calm. So in an ideal state, maybe you would never finish this. Maybe you would just keep working on it forever. Keep making it more accurate. Somebody else has observed that that they've never looked at money so carefully. It's true. Here's this thing that we see all the time, but when you slow down and really examine it, it's a very strange thing. I mean, much has been made of the other side of the dollar bill, which is full of all kinds of weird things like pyramids and eyeballs and strange sayings and stuff like that. It's a very mysterious thing that, of course, has fed all kinds of conspiracy theories. And now here I might be skirting with the law because I'm forging the Treasurer of the United States' signature. But I'm purposely doing it badly, so that this person, Rosa Samatata Reese, or whatever it is, will not be offended. That was quite bad. I did quite a bad job on that thing, but that's okay. I had a purpose. I've done this before with a dip pen. It's actually a far more pleasurable experience. So if you want to try that, I would recommend it. Doing it with a dip pen gives you so much more interesting lines than you'll get on the iPad. But you won't be able to zoom in, so you might need to buy yourself some magnifying glasses. Anyway, I'm going to stop this now. Well, there we have it. Making some money. Looks kind of cool when it's big, right? You can see that being a worthwhile endeavor. I mean, I've done maybe 20% of this thing, and it's taken me 2 days. What else let me just see what some of you guys have to say about all this process. Catherine says, I'm finding it interesting to be drawing a foreign currency for me, a 20-euro bill, because it's not in my language or my visual experience. I'm truly abstracting it back into shapes. That's a very good point. From what I remember about the euro is it doesn't actually say anything in any particular language, because it is a currency for lots of different languages, and it has lots of different things. What's happened here? Jen says it's great to have something to keep working on in a sketchbook. I think I would feel less pressure to finish it and would enjoy the process more. I think that's the point. I mean, I'm rushing it now. I actually was much more in the Zen state when I did the first part before coming to talk to you, sorry. But yeah, I think having this thing that you can go back to, almost like knitting or something, like here's this piece that I keep working on and working on and working on, and eventually it's the kind of thing that if you spend a huge amount of time on, it will be really, really beautiful in the end, because it'll show all that work you put into it. It'll be really deep and interesting. Mary asked if I'm drawing the same size. Well, as you can see, I'm drawing on the iPad, so the iPad varies different sizes. I don't think I could draw it this small. It's a really small drawing and really, really fine lines. It would drive me nuts. I don't think I could do it. I don't think there's any need to do it. I think that would be unnecessary. Jen says that she could never do spirograph because she would get halfway around and then lose it, and then it was a free-for-all. It's true. I would have that problem too. You draw it, and then suddenly it would skip out of the gears, and you'd be like, oh, now there's a big line. It was tough, particularly when I was like 9 years old, which is sort of prime spirograph time. It was very interesting. I think it would be cool to do a spirograph version of a dollar bill. I think the next thing to do, and I've done this a bit, is to take the spirit of the dollar bill, but then say, you know what, I'm not going to slavishly copy exactly what I see there, but I'm going to use the spirit. So I'm going to make up my own complex patterns. I'm going to make my own number. I'm going to make my own portrait. I've talked about, there's an artist who made postage stamps in this way. I did a whole Sketchbook Club video about this artist who did really, really complex sets of fictional postage stamps, and he would do watercolors, but he also did like really fine line drawings, and he would make whole sets of them in different colors. Beautiful stuff. You can find that in our feed. And the Preppy Craft Girl is new to drawing in with a micron in a sketchbook. Yeah, it's a really nice meditative thing to do. The micron is so teeny tiny little lines and bits, and also having it in a sketchbook means that you come back to it. You can carry it around with you, pull it out, spend 2 minutes doing it, spend 10 minutes doing it, get deep into it, just keep working on the same thing. I don't have it here with me, but I did one on a really big sketchbook about this big, and I spent probably a week just doing it, and I didn't do the whole thing. I think I did probably half of the dollar bill, like that size. Because the problem that you're going to hit is when you get to the George Washington, and then suddenly you're going to get into, am I getting a good likeness of George Washington? And that could screw you up. So just be careful with that part of it. What else did have you? Yes, Tony points out that this was an art before breakfast exercise. It's true. I had it in there, and I think a lot of people first learned about it there. But it's a really interesting, deep way for you to get into understanding and seeing. Courtney talks about the fact that I can zoom in and I can put Easter eggs. In fact, people have found Easter eggs, namely, you know, put up little words. Some people have said that on one part of the dollar bill, there is a little tiny owl who's hiding inside the tracery of the engraving. I don't know if that's true. And then supposedly the owl is a symbol of the Illuminati and conspiracy. But yeah, you could make a nice dollar bill and really, you know, feed your own messages into it. It could be very nice. So it could be a lovely self-expressive piece of art. John says we have a painter near me who paints pictures on chewing gum on the pavement. I love that. I wonder how he does that. So they're little tiny paintings then, and he draws on them, and I guess this chewing gum somehow locks in the paint. That sounds fascinating. At first I thought you were going to say he did drawings of chewing gum, which seems kind of dull. But Mary asks if I have a link for the postage stamp video. Well, I don't. But if you go to our channel, which you're on now, and look at Sketchbook Club, you will quickly find it there, with lots of other ones. Jules makes a very good point. Turn the bill upside down so you don't worry about likeness. Good point. Draw it upside down, and then you will be drawing abstractions. George Washington's face will become highly abstracted, and you won't have to worry. You can just focus on the relevance. So yeah. So excellent. You could use a Canadian $5 bill and draw Spock. Is Spock on the $5 bill? That's really interesting. Those Canadians, they're boldly going where no country has gone before. I admire that. And excellent. Well, I'm glad that the Preppy Craft Girl is enjoying art before breakfast, and hopefully you're leaving room on your shelf for my upcoming book. Should be out by the end of the year. How to Draw Without Talent. David Macaulay did, according to Thistle, did a series of books of drawing intricate portraits of castles and other architectural sites, and would also put little people and weird things in places. It's true. These books by David Macaulay, I highly recommend them as well. There are all kinds of interesting things. So he does ones on a cathedral and a castle and how they were built, and step by step these very elaborate drawings and how they were built. And he also did some kind of fanciful ones. There's one about, I think it's about an excavation of a motel, and people like in the distant future coming upon a 20th century motel and trying to figure out like what all the things are. There's also one called, I want to say it's called Empire State, and it's about how they decide to take down the Empire State Building. How would you take it apart? And how would you break all the pieces down and lower them down into the street? That's what I seem to remember about that book. He's a really intensive, detailed kind of artist, David Macaulay. Look him up. You can probably buy his books used easily on the internet, and I think you'll enjoy them. Well, listen, this has been fun. And I hope that you'll try some of this meditative drawing in its different forms. Just find something abstracted and try to draw it in as much detail as possible. You could draw a brick wall with old weathered bricks. I'm looking at one right now, and you could draw each brick and just focus on the outlines. You may or may not end up with a great drawing that you would love to frame and hang on the wall. You might, but I think the benefits are enormous. The benefits include really slowing yourself down so you observe much more carefully and overcome your preconceptions. They also help you with your neuromusculature, the connection between your eye, brain, and hand, so that you are drawing, by drawing in such detail, you're drawing slower, and you're really building those neurons that help you to draw instinctively much more easily. But also, I think most valuably, it's helping you to get into a meditative state where you are living in the present, you're seeing in the present, your brain is quieting down, you're calming yourself, and you're just drawing in the now, having this drawing experience. It's a really nice thing, and I hope that this is valuable. As with so many of these Draw With Me experiences, I'm trying to kind of pass on to you a thing that I've done, but I'm yammering through the whole thing, and I'm, dealing with the technology. So it sometimes inhibits that a bit. I'm getting better at it with each one, I hope, but I always welcome your input into how to make it better, or what you think is working or isn't working, and what I should do more of or less of. So let me know. I'm going to try... I'm going to wean myself off the iPad in future ones. I'm definitely going to be doing some with a dip pen. I'll be doing some other stuff like that for those of you who would rather that I worked in an analog fashion, and I certainly wouldn't mind doing that. So I'll be doing that, and I also want to get into more kind of exercisey things. I think some of the things that we've done that are interesting were, for instance, when we drew the mug shots, and we drew a lot of drawings pretty quickly. But I'd also like to try some other things that feel more like drawing exercises rather than trying to do a really great drawing by the end of an hour. But let me know. I mean, the more you tell me what you think would be interesting, the more I can do that kind of stuff. For me, the main purpose of this is to just sit down for half an hour to an hour on Thursday at lunchtime and just do a drawing, and know that I'm going to do that every week, and know that you'll be doing it with me. So I hope that you enjoy that, and I look forward to seeing that. This all brings up toast. Yes, that was interesting too. Drawing toast was originally in seeing, and then I think it was again in really real, drawing intensely, deeply a piece of toast. Trying to avoid carbs these days, but I would make a sacrifice for you people. Will this stream be archived? Yes, it will be. All of the Draw With Me's are available on YouTube Live for as long as Google is in business. And there we go. So thanks very much. Thanks for all your suggestions. Thanks for your comments. They are all really helpful to me and interesting, and it's lovely to chat with you while we're drawing. One thing I would love to do, but I'm not probably going to be able to do it, is to have music playing while we're doing this. But for copyright reasons, it's always problematic. However, feel free to listen to music while we're doing this. I hope you do. It's nice to listen to music while you're drawing, and hopefully you can still hear my voice and see what I'm doing over that. Thanks very much for joining me, and I hope that I'll see you in the iPad class, Be an iPad Artist, that will be starting in 10 days. It's not too late to sign up, and it's going to be really interesting. So whether you have drawn on an iPad or haven't, whether you would like to learn or just dabbling with it, please check it out. And if you have questions about what exactly the iPad should be, I'll address all that. Feel free to sign up for it, and then we'll get into it. And if for some reason you start doing it and you say this is not what I expected, that's okay. We have a 30-day money-back guarantee on all of our classes, and you can ask for your money back, and we'll just give it to you without question. So you have nothing really to lose by trying it out. And you can also pay over time, so you can pay in an installment plan if for some reason that's something that's of interest to you. Sketchbookskool.com, that's where you sign up. I hope to see you there. Bye-bye, and see you again next time.